Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to a panel on where is the Ring of Fire Press going. And I want to start it by giving you the history of this publishing house, because this is a somewhat unusual publishing house and has an unusual history. The publishing house started as an offshoot or offspring, or whatever you want to call it, of the 1632 series, which over time has become more and more called the Ring of Fire series, which is the origin of the name of the press. The first book in that series was published, I wrote it in 1999. It was published early into the year 2000, February of 2000, 20 years ago. We're celebrating a 20th anniversary of the book. And I wrote it originally to be a standalone novel, but we decided, partly because my publisher, Jim Bain, urged me to do it, and also because he waved quite a bit of money under my nose, which was what enabled me to start writing full time. So I figured out how I thought it would work as a series, and we launched it, and it has been going now for 20 years. As of now, Bain Books has published, I think we're up to 25 novels, and there's another one coming out in November. Plus there's another dozen anthologies of short fiction with 2 more coming out. And Ring of Fire Press, which got started a few years ago, has published a number of titles in the series itself, which are now number a total of 31 volumes. And there is an electronic magazine that was originally launched about 17 years ago, but originally on a sort of intermittent basis, but we decided to turn it into a real professional magazine starting in May of 2007. And it's been in operation ever since. And it's a fully professional magazine, pays professional rates. It's recognized by the Science Fiction Writers Association as a qualifying venue for membership. And we haven't missed an issue since. We're up to, where are we, Walt? Issue 91? Coming up to 90?
I think we just published 91. I think 92 is the next one.
Okay. So it's an enormous project, and part of the reason it's this big is because very, very early on, we started encouraging fans to write for the series. And what we wound up doing was you can call it organizing the fan fiction. Actually, as far as I know, there is no fan fiction for the 1632 series in the normal sense of the term, because we organize it and train people to write, and we publish the stuff that's good enough to publish, and we pay professional rates for it. So those writers are not fans, they're professional writers. What happened was that fairly early on, Bain Books, once we got the magazine up and running, Bain agreed to start publishing editions from the magazine. The magazine, I own the magazine, it's not Bain's. But what would happen is Bain will publish, initially it was 1-to-1, it was volume 1 became volume 1. But it soon became obvious we were going to outpace them. You know, they only have so many slots. So what we've been doing for the past 5 issues is we're using a best of format, so that we'll take the best stories from about 15 issues of magazine, and Bain will issue them as an edition, comes out in hardcover, then later mass market. There's also an electronic ebook edition of it. And we are going to be publishing the 9th such volume in July of next year. We've got 8 so far. The problem, though, that we ran into was that the Granville Gazette magazine, we are unusual among science fiction magazines in that we publish serialized stories in pretty much every issue. Most magazines no longer do that. It used to be pretty standard procedure in science fiction magazines, but most magazines don't produce serials any longer. And if they do, they're not long-running series. Whereas we do, and we intend to continue doing it. But the problem we run into is that by their nature, serialized stories are long stories, and you just can't fit them into an anthology because they would take up all the breathing room. So what was happening was we'd be publishing these long-running serialized stories in the magazine, and then once they completed their run, that was the end of it. And eventually we talked it over and decided that we had the basis where things were solid enough and the technology was now there that we could create our own publishing house, and that we could start publishing the stuff that Bain could not handle, either because of length or simply because they didn't have enough slots. I'm not the only author by any means that Bain Books publishes. So we launched Ring of Fire Press. Walt or Joy, you can correct me, or Gorg, but I think it was about 7, 8 years ago, somewhere around there is when we started. And by the way, I realized I jumped right over the necessary introductions. Sorry. So let's
Yes, you
break
did.
for a
You have a
moment
habit of that.
and let's back up. So if we can start, Joy, why don't you start?
Okay, I'm Joy Ward. I'm not sure what I am, but I'm sort of an editor and sort of a go out and find writers and read your stuff and whatever needs to be done. And I have a long history in publishing. I had about 25 years or so before I ever came to all of this as a nonfiction and a journalist and all other kinds of writing. So if I comment on your work, believe me, there's a few years behind it.
Walt?
I'm Walt Boys. I'm the editor of Eric's Grantville Gazette. Been doing that for about 40 issues ever since I took over from Paula Goodlett, who ran it for most of its existence. And I'm with Joy, the editors and managers of Ring of Fire Press. I do most of the incoming reading and send out the contracts. And in general, Eric's right. If we like it, we're going to try and publish it.
Gord?
I'm the gremlin that's locked in the back room who does the final processing and puts the books together so that they're ready for Amazon and Bain and our own website to publish and make available for you.
Down,
Also,
Igor, down.
No. Also, if you want to know the best place to buy to buy our books in terms of what's best for the writer is go buy it from our website, because we don't have any overhead there, so the writer gets a bigger cut.
With just one proviso, we do not and cannot publish the print-on-demand paper edition.
Right.
You have to get that through Amazon. We're not set up to do that. But yes, electronic versions of it, it's nice if you can get it from us, so we don't have to pay Amazon. Everybody else, every distributor takes a pretty big cut, which, is
Right.
the nature of things. And whereas we don't have to take that. What you sort of jumped over, Gord, was that you came into this as an author, not as a author.
Okay, I'm one of the keel plate owners of the Alexander Inheritance through Bain and the Demon Rift series through Ring of Fire Press, along with Eric.
First volume in there.
And also through the Warspell universe is mine and Paula's, and the Pandora's Crew universe is mine and Paula's.
And you're starting a young adult series.
Yeah, that's also mine and Paula's, and the magic is the same as in the Warspell series, but so far none of the books involve a merge at all. So the magic is very much the same, and they're stories about the early phases of the industrialization of magic, and they're young adult with a bit of adventure, and growing up and learning how to make things and to create things.
I originally met Gorg. Gorg was one of the fans who came up writing within the 1632 universe, and very early, so was Paula Goodlet, and very early on they formed a partnership, and they have worked almost entirely, not quite, but almost entirely as a team ever since. And they have co-authored with me so far 3 volumes in the 1632 series.
And yeah, and about 3 volumes out of the 6.
And yeah, and volumes out of it as well. They've written quite a bit. I mean, they have, they're well established. And by the way, New York Times bestseller in the case of Gork, because
Woohoo!
one of the novels that he and I and Paula wrote together, the Kremlin, 1636, the Kremlin Games, made the New York Times bestseller list. Okay, now that I have backed up and we completed the introductions, which, sorry about that. I'm trying to to go back to the history, that's how Ring of Fire Press got started. What we were doing was publishing the serialized stories that there was no other outlet for. And we initially did it on kind of a, be perfectly honest, something of a half-baked semi-pro basis. We didn't put much money or effort into it. The covers were just some image that we found on public domain, which we slap on a cover. And I could show you one of those old editions.
Let's not.
Let's not.
I think I won't. And they're easily recognizable. They got this sort of red cover with a picture in the middle of it. And someday, hopefully, they'll be collector's items. But we chugged along doing okay. You know, we didn't lose any money because of the way we published. But the best months we'd have, we'd sell maybe $2,000 worth. And then what happened was that about 3 years ago, Walton Joik approached me. Was it 4 years ago? Okay.
I don't remember.
And they said, look, you've actually got a publishing house, you know, I mean, which we did, you know, yeah, we did. I mean, it was originally set up just kind of as a side adjunct, but it is a real publishing house. And by then we had enough experience to know how you do this stuff. And they said, why don't we take it seriously, you know, and do 2 things. One, start really doing it in a professional way. And secondly, have a regular production schedule and you know, and there's no reason we can't start publishing stuff that's not part of the 1632 series, because we've got the whole wherewithal to do it. So I like the idea, and talked to Lucille, my wife, and I talked it over, and we thought, yeah, let's do it. So that's how we sort of relaunched Ring of Fire Press. And the key to it was that early in 2018, getting close to 3 years ago, no, late 2017, about 3 years ago, I ran into an artist named Laura Gibbons, whom I had used as one of the interior illustrators for Jim Bain's Universe magazine when I had been editing that back in 2006 to 2010. And she did really nice work. I liked her. And I asked her, I ran into her at a convention in Denver, as I recall. And I asked her, do you do book covers? And she said, yeah. So I said, let me look at some of them. So I did, and I really liked the work. So I said, how about doing some book covers for us? And she said, sure. So we started using her book covers instead of, I mean, a real professional artist book covers. And that made an enormous difference. It was the month of February of 2018, about 2.5 years ago. And when the results came in, we almost increased our sales by an order of magnitude, not quite, but pretty close. I mean, it made a huge difference just having a really good looking professional cover. I'd always sort of known that was true, but there is a reason commercial publishers put money into that, and it's money very well spent, believe me. And we had done a pretty decent job of proofreading prior to that, but we started using real professional proofreaders at that point. That, of course, increased our costs, but it also boosted our sales a great deal. And that's how we've been running it ever since. And we started taking on books that were not part of the 1632 series, and that has continued and actually increased ever since. At the point we're at now, we have just, the day this convention started with the publication of Reich and Kathleen Spoor's Jamaica Blue Magic, that is the 74th volume published by Ring of Fire Press. And of those 74 volumes, only 31 of them are Ring of Fire Press titles. No, they're all Ring of Fire Press titles, sorry. Only 31 are Ring of Fire series titles. The others are outside the series. Now, before I turn this over to others, I just want to explain something about the publishing house, which makes it unusual and actually, as far as I know, unique, although I won't swear to unique, but it's certainly unusual. And that's this. Because we are anchored in a very popular long-running series, the 1632 series, that gives us a solidity and stability that very few small presses have. Of the 74 volumes, there's a way in which we almost have two publishing houses, one of them piggybacking on the other. The 1632 titles all make money. Of the 31 we've published so far, 24 of them are already making money that cover all their own costs, and authors get their 50% royalties all the way through. So, including paying the royalties, they still cover all their costs and they're making money for us. Of the remaining 4 are gonna start making their costs within a year, and the other 3, there's no guarantee, but it's very likely they will before too much longer. One thing about electronic books in general, particularly the 1632 series, they have a long fat tail, is what they call it, which means the sales just keep going and going and going. And because we only publish electronic books, and we do publish paper editions, but we do print on demand. So once we produce the book, our costs are pretty much over. We don't have warehouse costs. We're not.
Except for maintaining the website.
Yeah, except for maintaining the website, but we have to maintain the website anyway.
Anyway.
Huh?
Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, right. Anyway, I mean, so that means we can take chances, and we have a lot of elbow room in terms of what else we decide to publish. And our basic philosophy is, if we like a book, we'll publish it. It's really pretty much that simple. We don't worry about, we're not bean counters. We don't worry about, is it going to earn out? Is it going to, well, first of all, you're not going to exactly earn out because we don't pay in advance. I think of our publishing as a sort of no risk on both sides. We're not taking a risk because we're not paying in advance, and we're not doing big major print runs because, for reasons I can explain later, we're not trying to distribute through the regular distributors in the bookstores, because if you do that, you got to be willing to accept returns, and that starts a whole ball of wax.
It's a
Don't
nightmare.
put them to sleep, Eric. Keep going.
Huh?
Don't put them to sleep. You're
right.
going to get boring there in a minute. Most of the people won't care about that.
Yeah, I know they don't.
I want to, if I could, I'd like to kind of leap off from what you said.
Go ahead.
About we publish what we like, and there are a couple of recent real examples of that. Joy met a fellow at WindyCon, was it?
I met him at several of them and started
Neil
following.
Lithick.
Yeah, Neil.
And she invited him to send. Why don't you tell it, Joy?
Yeah, I had talked with him and had looked at some of his work and thought, hey, this is really cool stuff. So we ended up taking Marked Territory, which, by the way, is a really cool book, especially if you like film noir, because we call it film noir crossed with
Watership Down meets
Watership
Sam
Down.
Spade.
There you go. Thank you, Gord. Yes, absolutely. And so it's a really, really cool book. And that's kind of how we work, is that we find really, really great writers and look for something. Now, I got to tell you, this book would probably not be picked up by most of the major houses. Why? Well, the main character is the cat. Okay, now,
Finale cat.
as a dog writer, and I have written a novel with the dog as the main character, major houses do not pick you up. They're not interested. I'm sorry, that's just the way it is. I guess they figured the dogs and cats haven't figured out how to order the book yet. I think that's a little short-sighted myself, but hey. So
Especially cats. Cats keep humans just because we have thumbs.
That's right. That's right. So, you know, as Jody Lynn and I could tell them, the cats would tell them to order. But needless to say, it's a really, really cool book. Another book that we picked up recently that is really fun and fascinating is Shoshana Edwards' Death Lives in the Water. It's got some very unusual characters, some really interesting characters, and something to keep everybody interested. Now, this one also might not have been picked up at a major house because it deals with old Eastern European mythology. And that's very hard to sell these days.
Mm-hmm.
But we have it. And you can get it on our site or on Amazon or any place else you find ebooks. You can get hard copies through Amazon too. But
another example of what we're talking about is I've been a serious fan of Cecilia Holland and her historical novels. Cecilia has written several YA fantasies and a Nebula-nominated science fiction book, but primarily she's a hard historical fiction writer. And I was having a discussion with her and found out that she had just written a great book that she didn't have a publisher for. And now she does. We just brought it out. It's called Heart of the World. And it's the Battle of Ain Jalut, where the Arabs hold the line against the Mongols. It's a great book. It's gritty. It's all the things that you want in fiction. And
it's Mongols.
And we're getting 5 more of her books, and hopefully some more. Joy and I just finished doing an interview with Cecilia that will be part of this convention. So we're looking for writers that pique our fancy. Eric, you had a kind of a list of the types of writers that we normally look for.
Yeah, there are, well, of course, there's 1632 series writers that you know, that's a given. But there are 3, call them categories of authors, I don't know, that we are particularly look for. I mean, this isn't to exclude anyone else. It's just this is sort of what we are particularly keeping an eye out for. The first is new authors. Breaking in is really tough in the publishing, and it's always been tough. In some ways, it's easier today just because there's a proliferation of small presses, which and self-publishing, of course, can be done, but there are a lot of problems with self-publishing, which I don't know. We don't have a panel at this convention on the myths of self-publishing, but I will try to sketch them quickly. One of them is that whatever your skill level is going into it, it's likely to stay there because you're not getting the kind of editing that a publisher would give you. That's part of the job of a publisher, is to give you. And There are a few authors who don't ever need any training, but I'm certainly not one of them. If I hadn't come up through Bain Books, I was a good writer. I was a very talented writer, which is why they bought my first novel. But I learned a lot. At first, I learned it from David Drake, whom Bain Books hooked me up with quickly, but I also learned it from both Jim Bain and Toni Weisskopf, who was the chief editor, and she is now the publisher of the magazine. So you will learn a lot from a good editor. You really will. And you will improve your skills. And if you just go straight into self-publishing, you're going to miss that. Secondly, you're going to probably try to do it on the cheap, which means you're not going to get good cover. You're not going to pay up a real professional proofreader to proofread it. All this costs somewhere close to $1,000 to do it right. And people try to skimp on it, and it's almost certainly not going to work. And then you got to cover all the costs. And then there's a major skill set involved. You can ask Gord about that because he's had to learn it over the past, couple of years. And if you don't already have it, you're going to have to learn it, which is, if nothing else, going to take up a lot of your time. That means you're not spending it writing. And then it's not, although once you know how to do it, it doesn't take that long, but it's still a fair amount of work putting a book together. So there are a lot of advantages to going to a publisher, especially, if you a major commercial publisher or a good small publisher. But we're looking for new authors, and I'll explain in just a moment. There are the avenues you can reach us through. The second thing we're looking for is well-established authors who for one reason or another, have a property or properties that they either can't or find it hard to publish through a regular major commercial publisher, or just simply don't want to because of the changes they need to make. The reason that Gordon Paul and I decided to publish this series is because we originally took it to major publishers, and two of them, both of whom I know and like, and the editors wanted some changes in it, major changes, which I understood why they wanted them. It wasn't like I thought they were nuts or anything. In fact, it was certainly the voice of caution would have led me to do what they wanted us to do. But Gordon Paul and I just didn't want to do it.
Oh, come on, Eric. That never really came to us. You decided you didn't want to do it.
Okay, no internecine wars here.
I'm being stabbed. All right, fine.
Sample of what Eric was talking
Neither
about.
one of you objected, and neither one of you is slow to object if you want to. Anyway, that's why we decided to publish this, and the sequel just came out, The Demons of Constantinople.
And another author in that vein is a very well-known science fiction author by the name of Tom Doyle. Tom had a book that absolutely did not fit in his published oeuvre, the American Craftsman series and other military science fiction. And so he brought it to us and asked us if we'd publish it. And we liked it a lot and said, sure.
Well, there's another one. We're going to be starting in a few months. We had a panel on this convention talking about it. David Brin wants to publish a new project of his through us, and that's the Colony High series, which is it's sort of young adult, but it's on the edge of adult fiction. And part of the reason is because the way he wanted to do it, which we agreed fits that series quite well, which is a series of short novels that would follow in fairly quick succession. And this is the kind of thing that's hard to do through a big commercial publisher, because first of all, they don't want anything short. They want it beefy. Secondly, publishing every 6 months, well, maybe. So David just decided he decided to do it through us. And so we're going to be starting that first book, which is called Sky Horizon, is going to be published in January. In the case of Cecilia, what happened was Walt came to me and said, and told me that Cecilia wanted to do her book through us and asked me if I was willing. And I had not at that point read Cecilia Holland. I knew about her because she's damn near a cult figure among writers whom I know and respect, like David Drake, Steve Sterling, S.M. Sterling. I mean, anybody, a lot of writers who work with historical material know Cecilia Holland, and they just think she's an enormously talented, terrific writer, and has been for a long time. And so I said, sure. And then I did read Heart of the World, and I could see exactly why she has a reputation she does. It's a terrific novel. So we said, what the hell, let's do it. And once we did that, made that decision, we said, well, why don't we just open up an historical fiction line? I mean, okay, we're not supposed to be publishing that stuff. Screw it. It's our publishing house. We can do whatever the hell we want.
We've got a barn. We can have a show.
And what that enabled us to do is Stoney Compton's a terrific writer, and he's been a friend of mine going all the way back to when he and I were both winners in the 1993 Writers of the Future contest. We both, I won first place and he won second place in the winter quarter of 1992, and that's when we met. And we've been friends ever since. And some years later, I helped him get his first novel published through Bing Books, which is Russian America. It's a terrific alternate history novel. Stoney has written he's finished the first book and he's working on a second of a straight historical fiction that's called Treadwell. Takes place in Alaska early in the 20th century. And it's just a terrific novel, but it's hard to find a commercial publisher who's going to look at it. And so he went ahead and self-published it. And then we approached and said, look, we're going to start an historical fiction line. If you want, we'll distribute it through ours too. And he's agreed to that. So we're going to start producing his stuff. And if we run across other historical fiction writers alike, we'll publish their stuff. That's kind of the way we approach these things. And the final kind of author we keep an eye out for are good mid-list writers who've gotten orphaned, which happens to mid-list writers.
Mm-hmm.
Depressing frequency, and what I mean by orphaned is they're with a publishing house, but their sales aren't what that publishing house wants, and so they say, nice knowing you, goodbye. And I want to stress, this has very little to do with how good a writer is. What determines sales is a number of things. The quality of the writing is one of them. There's no question about it. But there's another factor that I think people don't think about much, which is somebody can be a terrific writer, but write the kind of stuff that just doesn't have a broad appeal to it.
Mm-hmm.
And other writers can write stuff that is no better in terms of quality, but just happens to be a type of writing that there's a much bigger market for.
And even if you are writing the kind of stuff that a lot of people would like, often enough, a lot of people just aren't going to see it.
Yeah, they don't see it. Right.
Yeah,
No,
they don't know about it.
Right. No, that's the other thing that happens. It's anyway. So if we run across authors like that and they want us to publish their stuff, again, the proviso is we have to like the books. And, if we don't like them,
we don't publish
crap. But we're not going to publish it. And so we have some authors like that we're publishing as well. And hopefully, one thing this does is give them an avenue, gives them a way they can keep working, keep getting their stuff out. And I should mention, by the way, that we have the best reversion rights of, so far as I know, any publisher in the business, which is we only acquire the rights for books and ebooks for 1 year. That's it. After 1 year, the rights revert back to the author. We keep them a little longer if we do an audiobook because there's more we have to put into that. It's more expensive. But even then, we don't keep it that long. And what we found happening is what we expected, which is that there's been one exception due to special circumstance, but authors, once that year's up, they just let us keep producing a book and distributing it. And because what the hell, it's going well.
Yeah. All right, one proviso from the back room.
Yeah.
Amazon has a policy, once a paperback book comes out, they won't take it down. So our version of the paperback is still going to be up. Now, they made an exception for that one case that you were talking about, Eric, but that's it. They're not going to make any more exceptions.
Right.
So it doesn't mean that you can't publish it, a new version of it with a different publisher, but we are unable to take down our
How is
version
Amazon?
because
That's not legal.
yeah, it
Because
is.
It is now.
because they can, Eric, because they
Well,
can.
yeah, I know. See, yeah, I know that, but I'm
Well,
just
But
trying to
it's-
figure out because
the thing about it is once you print it, once you've got a print book,
right.
you don't own all those books in the future. People have bought them. They can now, after having read them, they can put them up to sell as a used
That's
book,
right.
which means Amazon has an actual reasonable, legitimate argument to saying, okay, this edition of this book is still available for resale. And
Right.
that's why
What
they
we-
won't take it
what we-
down. It's
All
not,
we can do is,
that we-
set all we can do
we can
is
stop selling ours,
Mhm.
but we can't have the
well,
page
there is
taken
one
down.
way we could torpedo them. We'll have to think about this, but that is just start charging
This is not the time
$100 a copy for ours. And
We
you know,
don't-
make
we
the
don't
other
put-
one competitive, huh?
Let's not put legal consultations online right now. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's move on past this. But no, you're absolutely right, Gord, because I have seen some of my old books that I thought were out of print that are selling for like $20 or something,
Yeah.
which is crazy
And
wild. But you know,
that's the reason I wanted to point that out
thank you.
was I don't want to have Ring of Fire Press getting, you promised we could have our rights back.
Right.
You need to take this down. I want
I
people
wonder,
to
we'll
know
have to
that
discuss
if we
this
can't
after.
take
'Cause
it
I
down.
didn't realize, we may have to even put that language in the contract saying, as far as we're concerned, you got the rights back, but it's up to you to beat Amazon down because, you know.
Well, yeah, and basically you can still publish your next edition, your second edition of the book through a different publisher. That's fine.
Oh, they
But
can
we
do
can't-
that if they want to. A lot of people may
Yeah.
want. All right, fine. All right. Well, let's not get sidetracked into this, but I still don't.
Right.
Never mind.
Just the backroom
Yeah.
mechanics of it that I wanted people to be aware of. Also, I wanted you guys to be aware of it.
Thank you.
Thank you. The thing is that we can take more chances and look at more things and publish more books than the average publisher because we can.
Yeah.
And because we're backed by sales of the 1632 series, we can take a flyer every so often on a brand new author or an author with a weird, quirky book like Marked Territory,
Hey,
or even just say, oh, by the way, we're going into historical fiction now, because we can, and because we are open to it. So an author who is looking for a publisher who is very open to new books and new authors could do a heck of a lot worse than looking at Ring of Fire Press.
well, if I may jump in,
Please do.
it's not just about the authors, because a lot of you out there are probably not going to be authors. You're probably not interested in being authors. You're just wondering, what is this for me? Why do I care about what's going on with Ring of Fire Press? Well, because we can get some really, really good books, and we can be your place to find your next good read, because we're readers. We're not going to buy books just because it's got Bill Bob's name on it. Okay. We don't care about Bill Bob. We care about the writing, and we care that you like the writing. So we're going to be your place. We want to be your go-to place to find your next books. So just
We got a lot
remember,
of
Ring
them.
of Fire is about reading. All that other stuff is all good. And if you want to talk about author stuff, that's cool. But come buy books. Come get our books and support these interesting writers who are out there who can't get published elsewhere because they're writing stuff that is just too interesting. There you go, guys.
Seriously, there's the modern publishing house is not run by editors.
No.
It's run by
There's a
accountants.
few that are. I mean, Bain Books still isn't. I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tony, yes. All hail Tony.
Not many of them. No, not many.
We
But
love Tony.
the other ones aren't. Cecilia Holland was telling us how she sold her first book. Her college English teacher took her manuscript to Athenaeum Books, to a guy that he knew, who was the publisher of Athenaeum, and said, "Here, read this. You'll like it." And he said, "Fine, I'll buy it." That stuff doesn't happen anymore
No.
in the big presses that are owned by large German companies with interesting sounding names.
Right.
They
I'm picking on the Germans. Trust me, if they were owned by giant American companies, they would be just as bad.
Nothing against Germans. I love Germans. They're all good. But the problem is
It's
they
a different
aren't interested in
mindset.
reading.
I know it is.
the publishing business in general, the large publishing houses are run by accountants,
Right.
No.
not editors.
No, that's true. Yeah.
And because of that, they treat authors like products,
Right.
the way you would expect an accountant to do. This is not to say that there isn't a place for accountants, because there certainly is, one or two. The truth is, if you want to be a writer, you want to talk to an editor, not an accountant.
That's right.
And you'll get farther with an editor than an accountant. And our editing team consists of me, Joy, and Eric, and that's a lot of years of editing.
Mhm.
Eric, you've edited what, 35 anthologies, counting all the ones
More than
you've
that,
done?
because 12, a dozen, well, 14 counting the two new ones from the 1632 series, and then two from about a half a dozen others, at least, of new fiction written. And then I did all those reissues, but those are reissues of established writers from times past.
But who's counting?
James H. Benson and Chris Randall and Keith Laumer and Randall Garrett and Murray Leinster, that, in all honesty, that took editing in a sense of selection, but it wasn't like I did a whole lot of it. I did some, but not a lot.
Whereas Joy and
Yes, I am a very experienced editor, yes.
Yes, you are.
Joy and I came to editing from nonfiction.
Mhm.
I was editor-in-chief of a major trade magazine for 10 years, and contributing editor to trade magazines for 10 years before that. Joy has an even larger history as a journalist, writer, editor. And so what do you expect when you get a book that we want to look at? The first thing you're going to get is real editing, real developmental editing.
Mhm.
You're going to get, I'm sending you this manuscript back because I need these changes, and if you make these changes correctly, I will buy the book. Instead of, oh, sure, we can slap our name on this thing and publish it. Sure, we can. No, we want to grow authors, and we have a really long history of doing that. The Grantville Gazette started as an offshoot of the writers' forums on Baines Bar, which were offshoots of the Jim Baines Universe magazine. And so for more than 10 years now, we have been running a very extensive set of critique groups where, in fact, the only way you can get published in the Grantville Gazette, except by special circumstances, is to run your story through the 1632 Crit group. What does this do? Well, it makes some pretty good writers. We now have had over 160 writers in the 1632 series who have sold us their very first professional sale. That's something that we're all really proud of, and we brought that over to Ring of Fire Press. I'm just delighted to work with people who are willing to work with us. I'm working right now with a guy who has written a near future disaster thriller. He's never written a word of fiction before, but he's got about 6 million words of nonfiction under his belt. So we'll see what he comes up with. The idea is that we want to look for new writers, both at Ring of Fire Press and also the Grantville Gazette. We need some writers there too. And we're not looking for the standard science fiction tropes. We will publish a good standard science fiction story if one pops up. But if somebody gives us a story that is really and truly off the wall, we'll be happy to take a look at it, and we'd like to. We're getting how many books have we published now, Eric? 75?
74 as of Jamaica Blue Magic, which came out on Thursday.
Cool.
Just came out on October 8th.
And the good news is that as of October 1st, tomorrow, we're going to be publishing a book a week. That's a huge, that's really a huge accomplishment, we think. And I'm going to break my arm patting us all on the back at the same time.
What that means is you can't tell me that you don't have something to read. We've got lots of books for you to read.
You bet. Come buy them. Because
Right.
the more of them you buy, the more new authors.
Especially mine.
That's true. And Gorg and Paula have written some of the most interesting fantasy
Oh, great stuff.
that I have ever read. The Merge universe is one of the most fascinating takes on magic that I've ever seen. I really do like it. So there, consider your head batted nicely. Yes.
Also got a great space opera series going with started with Pandora's Crew and
Yep.
Arachne's Web and the Rat Rebellion.
Right, there you go.
Well, we do have a lot of experience developing new writers. I mean, we've been doing it for almost 20 years now, through the 1632 series, and now we're in a different way doing it in a more traditional way as editing a publishing house. And as Walt mentioned, by the way, in every issue of the Grantville Gazette, we publish at least one story that's not part of the 1632 series, sometimes two. I want to
that's an homage to Jim Bain's Universe magazine, which was the first successful electronic magazine. If we hadn't been 5 years too early, we'd still be publishing it.
Yeah. No, we were what they used to call premature anti-fascists. Well, the problem was we launched. Jim Bain launched it. I mean, he's the one who put up the money for it. But we launched that magazine in June of 2006.
Yeah.
Just 3 weeks.
Yeah, 1630, whatever, would have been way too early.
No, I mean, it was just before Jim Bain died. He died 3 weeks after the first issue came out. At least he got to see it come out. And it lasted for 4 years. And the problem was that at that time, there was no generally big, well-established electronic book reading platform. And if we had done it after Amazon came out with Kindle, I think it would have gone, because it came pretty damn close.
Yeah, it would still be running.
Yeah, wasn't like it bombed. But it just couldn't quite. So anyways, it was just losing money, and after a while, we couldn't just keep it going. I want to just, because we're starting to get a little low on time, I want to explain one thing to new authors or aspiring new authors who may be watching this. Just so you understand, we do not take unsolicited manuscripts. And the reason is because we can't. Because if we did that, we would get flooded with manuscripts, most of which, the big majority of which, would not be publishable. And what it would do, first of all, we haven't got the labor force to do it. And even if we could do and could afford to do what major publishers do, which is to hire first readers, even in their case, what happens is it makes a very slow process. My first novel sat on a slush pile of Baen Books for 2 years before anybody read it. And then it moved fairly fast after that. And that wasn't unusual. I mean, stuff like that happens all the time.
Yep.
And I'm not dumping on anybody because it's just a reality when you're getting that many manuscripts. So we can't take unsolicited manuscripts. That means you got to connect with us one way or another. There are various ways you can do that. If you can do it the way Walt described happened with Cecilia Holland way back when. That's one way to do it. You go through somebody, you know, we don't want to talk to nobody sent, as the mafia would say. But if you can find an intermediary whom we do know and whose judgment we have reason to trust, then that's a good enough for us to say, okay, let us read it.
Guido says this is a really good story.
Exactly. That could be an agent, but it has to be an agent that we either know or whose reputation we know, because just being an agent doesn't mean anything. Other ways to do it, it's a little harder now because of the pandemic, but a number of the authors that we publish, new authors, I met through the Superstars Writing Seminar where I'm an instructor. Another way to do it is through Writers of the Future contest, which I am a judge. I'm sorry?
Conventions.
Conventions are another. The reason to go to conventions and all these things is not to promote your work. It drives me nuts when I see new authors, you know, spending all their time trying to push their books. Trust me on the math. You can't possibly make enough sales to make up for what you lost paying to come there. Or even if you're the guest of honor and the convention pays your way, which they've done with me a number of times, but here's the reality. I lose about a week's work when I go to a convention. The time I take, and Dave Weber estimates you lose more time than that. And that's days I'm not writing. And I mean, I'm going to lose several $1,000s when I go to convention, not in immediate expense, but in what economists call opportunity cost. But the real reason to do it, other than the fact that it's sort of good for ego, there's no doubt about that, and your psyche, but the other reason to do it is you start developing a professional network. And sooner or later, that will pay off. You can't predict where or how, but it will. I've never known it not to if you get to know people. The other way, and the other final way to do it, if you have any inclination or interest at all, is do it through the 1632 series. We are always welcoming new writers. The advantage to the way we have people submit their stories is it's not the traditional way that you write a story, send it across, and then we either say yes or no, and that's the end of it. Because once a publisher says no, they're not going to look at it again. What we will do is work with you. We're essentially running a writer's workshop at the same time, if that's how you submit the story. And what happens is that Walt and Bjorn Hostler, who's our assistant editor, will monitor it. You know, they'll see there's a lot of discussion goes on with other writers, and out of that, they will see the ones that look like they're either publishable as is, or more often could be with some work, and they'll start working with the author on it.
And it's almost impossible to get me to send an author an email that says, "Thank you, don't submit this here anymore." The truth is that you can keep rewriting it and submitting it through the workshop until everybody stops talking about it, in which case you can slink home or you can get a check from us, because we do buy them. And the bottom line is that there's no such thing as a rejection letter from the Grantville Gazette. What you get instead is, here, this is the critique we have. Now go off and fix it and come back. And we will do that as many times as it takes to get a publishable work. The current the current number of revisions, the record is now 17 revisions before the story became published.
How many
I
did
will not say who the author was.
How many did I make you do all the way back when?
7.
7. That's what my memory was. Yeah.
And so I tell people that story all the time. It's what you needed to do to turn me from a professional nonfiction writer into a professional fiction writer.
Yeah. What happened was Walt asked me if I'd critique a story, which he had put up in the conference. This conference takes place on Bain's Bar, which is Bain Books' website. It's easy to find it. And I looked at it. I said, "How's your ego?" And he said, "My ego's in fine shape." I said, "Okay." I said, "Because what I'd like to do is critique it publicly, because it wasn't just private." I said,
"That's not all you said, but that's okay."
So what I did was put it up on the website, and I'd give a public critique, and then Walt would go back and rewrite it and put it back up, and I'd do it again. And it took, that's my memory, 7, but we published
7 times.
Yeah, we published it. And he has gone on to become a writer on his own. In fact, he and I are starting to work on a novel we're going to do together. I will say this, and I mean it quite honestly, it's a hell of a good publishing house. It really is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very proud of it. We all are. It's good both for writers and for readers. I mean, Joy's quite right about that. It's not just something we do for writers. We do, but we also want readers. We want as many as we can get. And so far, we're doing pretty well. We want to expand more. We have a good, solid, stable financial basis for it because of the 1632 series, but we want to expand beyond that because one thing starts giving us more options. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that.
Well, yeah, it gives more options for things for us to read too, because you got to remember, we're not just editing this off the top of our heads and we're bored. So we want to read good stories too. So we're not going to release bad stories to you or bad editing because we don't want to read it either.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
I think we're about done, Eric.
I think we are. I'm pretty sure we've
one final note from the back room.
Yes,
Please.
Igor. What is it?
Igor, what?
Keep your titles short. Remember, some poor suffering soul is going to have to fit that thing on the spine of your book.
Yeah, we will.
Keep it short, please.
Your title. There is one exception. If you write a big fat book, we can sort of go with a long title, but you're still better off with a shorter one.
There's an old joke, an ode to the infinite variety of enemy cuisine. Damn spam. For a joke like that, the title being longer than the poem, that works. For a doctoral thesis, really long title works. For a novel, not so much. I
have written a novel for the Mage, one of whose big parts consists entirely of chapter headings. There's no actual chapters. go one chapter heading to the next. But that is a weird book.
That may have killed Jim Bain, you know.
Huh?
That
Well,
may
what
have
happened was
killed
it was
Jim
actually
Bain.
the first book I wrote, and my agent liked it herself, but she said this is going to be a very hard sell, and sure enough, it was. And after a couple of years, I said, Shauna, let's just take it off the market, because in the meantime, I'd written a much more straightforward science fiction adventure, which was Mother of Demons, and that's the first book we actually sold. And then I eventually got For the Mage published, because Jim Bain, by then I was doing very well for Jim Bain, and Jim basically said, I want you to just publish through me. And I said, well, okay, Jim, but then that means you got to be willing to publish everything I write. And I said, and I know you're not going to like this. And he didn't, but I give him credit, although he started with Philosophical Strangler, but which is somewhat more readable version of that, or not readable, they're both readable, but they're just oddball. I mean, they really are oddball comic fantasies. But
Yes, they are.
what the hell? I got enough time. This is a funny story. The first place
You know
that
you
my
weren't getting
agent
bored
sent it
about
was
the
the
Eric
tour
Grant.
books, because she thought David Hartwell, who was then their chief editor, he passed away a few years ago, would like it. Precisely because of its sort of weird literary qualities. And David did like it. And he went to Tom Doherty, who is Tom's now sort of at least semi-retired, but in those days he was actively running tour. But he couldn't talk Tom into it. Tom said it's too weird. It's the first book in a series by an author nobody's ever heard of, so no. And then years later, after I had started to make a splash of the 1632 series, I met Tom for the first time at I think it was a World Fantasy Con, if I remember right. And so I went up to him. Now, this is the ideal writer's daydream, where you get to confront the guy who first turned you down and say, and instead I thanked him, because that would have been a terrible book for me to start my career with.
Yep.
It really would have. I mean, it's I think it's a terrific book, but it is weird. And I would have, if I'd been able to get published, I probably would have gotten typed right away as some kind of weird cult writer. And my audience.
Aren't you?
No, actually, I'm not. But and actually, in the end, both Ford the Mage and Philosophical Strangler have sold pretty damn well. I mean, I don't sell in the range of 1632, but they made money for everybody. And in fact, I'm going to have the third book written in that series, hopefully not by the end of the year, but soon.